Gotham, a TV series I've watched 3 times because I enjoy it that much. Does it jump the shark sometimes? Yes. Did it end with never resolved plots? Also yes. But regardless, I loved it, along with the show's take on the villains. Making subtle changes to the characters make them feel distinct from the versions of those characters we've seen before. From Penguin's rise to the top being a season-wide arc, to Scarecrow now being a traumatic result of Jonathan Crane's fears, which completely drops the Professor angle of the character. However, a character on the show that was changed so much, they were deemed later on to be a separate character, and that was Firefly. Now, in the comics at the time, there were 2 Fireflies. Kinda. The history of Firefly is really confusing. But a brief summary is that there's 2 Fireflies, both male, Ted Carson and Garfield Lynns. However, on the show's second season, we would get a 2-part episode, episodes 5 and 6, where we meet the show's version of Firefly, who is not a man, nor even a female version of Ted or Garfield, but instead a completely different character. She was named Bridgit Pike, who also, unlike the other 2 Fireflies, is actually a young character, while the 2 Fireflies in the comics are typically much older. In fact, Ted Carson has been depicted as being middle-aged before. So to have the character be a young woman was a pretty big change. Now, the idea of a Lady Firefly isn't completely new. There was a scrapped episode of the new Batman Adventures that would have introduced a Lady Firefly, that being the original Firefly's ex-girlfriend, Cassidy, who after the initial Firefly episode was traumatized by her ex-boyfriend, starting a very rational fear of flames, something that was intended to set her up to embrace that fear to become the new Firefly, which does sound kinda Scarecrow-y. But this of course never happened because the show was cancelled after season 2. Which is honestly kinda sad. I would have actually probably liked that episode or concept. It sounds like a pretty cool idea. But unfortunately, like said, it never got to happen. Back to Gotham's Firefly. The character started her character arc off in season 2 as a friend of Selena Kyle, as well as her brothers being a part of a group called the Firebugs, a reference to another fire villain in comics. Now, while she first started off working as their maid, practically being discriminated against for being the only sister and not a brother, however, when the Firebugs are hired for an arsonist job and their skinny member is killed, her brothers put Bridgit in their plans to commit arson, since she's the only one who can actually crawl through the small spaces that they needed to go through. While at first she was against the idea, she would soon find herself semi-embracing it. She would create herself a fireproof suit so she wouldn't get burned again, as well as going out as Firefly just on her own. Well, with Selena, but also with other brothers. That to rob a sex trafficking ring, where Bridgit sees all these women in cages and feels like it symbolizes her own metaphorical cage being trapped with her abusive brothers, leading to her eventually snapping and killing her family. Well, technically she only killed one of them, Harvey killed the other, after he woke up on the scene after she burned him alive. However, in the second episode of the 2-part issue, you lose your final battle against the GCPD, ending with her fireproof suit melting to her skin, which makes her fireproof. I don't get how that works because if it's fireproof, how did it melt to her? As well as the fact it doesn't cover her face. I'm just gonna go with it. This would lead her to be taken to Indian Hill under the care of Hugo Strange. Regardless if you watch the show or just read the comics or have even heard of the character, you know that's not good. Hugo would experiment upon her, which would end with her believing that she's now a fire goddess, and becomes a rival of Mr. Freeze in the season finale when he tries to kill Selena. Bridgit would later just be relegated to just being a freak, who would go on to work for the Penguin as his bodyguard along with Mr. Freeze, who she would still have issues with. However, the character, unlike Mr. Freeze, wasn't all that focused on. But instead, the character really just became a Penguin henchwoman. The season 4 finale did end with her having her own territory in No Man's Land, but we never got to see any of that. We do get mentions of her and Mr. Freeze being at war in season 5, because I don't know why they're at war. I guess they just don't like each other because of fire and ice. But we never see it, which is kinda sad because it sounds pretty cool. But nope, it gets resolved off screen, because that's always fun. I'm not salty, you're salty. Okay, I am a bit salty about it. Just because that sounds like a really cool idea, with the opposite turfs being against each other. Bridgit, I think, started off as a pretty strong character, that in her origin and even episodes afterwards, primarily in season 2. However, once the character started to work for the Penguin, she loses all of her motivation. In fact, it's technically Penguin's fault what happened to her since he was the one who employed her brothers. Yet, that's never a problem for her during her time working for him. And if it is, it's off screen. She would go from being sympathetic to being full-on villainous. Just simply being okay with murdering the entirety of Gotham. Something even Penguin was against. That being during the whole League of Horribles. The change of gender to the character makes sense to me for the origin, with it focusing on women in abusive situations along with dark tones of rape, sexual violence, and overall targeted abuse having a very strong feminist commentary. Something that likely wouldn't have worked if the character had been Ted Carson or Garfield Lynns. However, one could argue that the character didn't need to be Firefly in the first place, but really any female character. An original character or even from the comics. Batman has a pretty big rogues gallery, including some pretty unknown female characters that could have been retouched for this storyline. Although not saying the commentary couldn't have been retouched to fit a male character. Anybody can be a victim of abuse. The commentary, however, was mainly for female characters, with a stronger focus on feminist qualities of the message. Therefore, I think that would have been lost if the character had been male. Which, yet again, is not me saying that the character could not have been male, I'm just saying the commentary itself I don't think would have worked with the male character. With the general focus on feminist storytelling. After Season 2, the character also became very different. Her friendship with Selena and her feminist roots were completely dropped. Even though those were pretty big factors of her origin, they are completely ignored in Season 3 and 4. Resulting in the character feeling pretty different. Which also isn't helped by the recasting of the character. Starting off with Michelle Ventimiglia playing the character in Season 2, only to be replaced by Camila Perez in Seasons 3 and 4. And the two women don't even look alike. Something I think they noticed as to why the character when played by Camila hardly does anything. Only for Michelle to come back in the later half of Season 4. Which is also pretty weird because we spent a season and a half with Camila, but about 3 episodes with Michelle. So I do find it a little odd that they utilize Michelle more when it comes into speaking parts. Or actually doing anything, because Camila Perez unfortunately doesn't get to do anything with the role. And instead just becomes a henchwoman for the Penguin with a fire weapon, which in itself is still pretty cool, but very dissonant from the original concept of Firefly in this series. Bridgit Pike would also find her way into the comics in Detective Comics issue 988 from 2018, where she is a follower of both Ted Carson and Garfield Lynns. However, her origin isn't the same. Instead, she's a protege of Ted Carson who works for Cobra. The two of them are sent by Cobra to assassinate Batman. That does not go well for them, as you would suspect. This character feels more or less as just an Easter egg of Gotham's version of Firefly, opposed to being a proper bleed back of the character. Because yes, she's a female Firefly named Bridgit Pike, but other than that, the character has nothing in common with Bridget from the show. It's still a pretty cool reference, but it's not necessarily Bridget. In fact, she really could have been named really anything. I also don't understand why she has to be called Lady Firefly, because there's 2 Fireflies currently active, why couldn't there be a third? Although yet again, I just don't like the name Lady Firefly, so perhaps I'm biased. And a version of the character would appear in the Harley Quinn show tie-in comics, who is once again a follower of Firefly and once again called Lady Firefly. Her design is more bug-like, heavily inspired by her 2018 comic appearance, but more or less kind of looking more gross, like an actual bug, which is very fitting in this canon. It's actually pretty cool to see the character in a different form of media. Even if it isn't the show itself, I do think that this is a pretty cool reference to the character, even if it is only for a few panels. Although it does add the character to the show's canon, meaning she could show up on the show anytime. For the very least, a cameo. Overall, Bridget, I did think started off pretty interesting, but quickly became a generic henchman for the Penguin. And dropped pretty much everything that was interesting about the character. Which is a pretty bold move and one that I think they shouldn't have done. I do think that the character has potential still, but considering her last appearance was in 2018, besides her Harley Quinn tie-in comic appearance, I don't see that happening. Unless she returns as some sort of cameo or Easter egg. Which I would be up for, but I don't think she's coming back as an actual villain anytime soon. Which is unfortunately kind of sad because there was a really missed opportunity with the character. She had some pretty strong moments in her two-part origin. Dare I say great moments. But all of that just got completely retconned away. Although that's my own personal opinion on the character. What are yours? Do you think that she still has potential, or that she's just a one-and-done villain? And that's it. Like always, please like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!